Hi, welcome. We're doing the second project for the 7th graders art docent program. We are going to be making our version of African masks. Here's a few samples of finished products. So over here in the class folders, you're going to have a printout of the game, Name That Mask. There are these worksheets for each group. The kids will be divided into 5 groups because in this bin we have 5 masks that are made of wood. They're a little more authentic. The kids are broken up into the 5 groups. They each get a mask. The kids discuss and answer all of the questions for about 10 minutes, maybe a little more. They will take all the time chatting and talking that you give them, but maybe you cut them off after 5 or 10 minutes, and then they present it. And that probably takes about 4 or 5 minutes per group, maybe 2, depending on the kids. It really depends on the group. So I would talk to the teacher. When you are setting up, the first thing that you need to know is that the art cart is going to be at the back. It's all set up. It has everything on it that you need. It has the clay, it has examples, it has the masks for the game, a bunch of tools back here that you'll be using to make details and to work with the clay. And then some of the little details that the kids may or may not want to use include pony beads and little wires that they can shape and form to be details on their mask. There is a stack of plates. Each student will start the project with a plate and a Sharpie. They'll need to write their name, and then they'll need to hold on to the Sharpie because at the end they're going to name their mask, to give it a name. During the presentation, they learned that there's a purpose for each mask, that it's communicating something, and so they will decide what they're trying to communicate with their mask. And so they put their name on before they start, they name it at the end. And this is also their work surface. So in the white bin, you have instructions both on top, and there's multiple copies of the instructions written out. It's the instructions on how to cut the clay. So you'll find this in the bin. All right, so docents. There are a number of things that you do to prepare that day. You don't need to come in before. You don't need to practice it beforehand. The clay is kind of expensive, but it does involve some preparation. The first thing I would do as a docent is make sure that you have the tools for at each table. Again, use 3-4 tables there in the art room. You want little rollers out. There's all different kinds of sticks and spoons for the students to make different impressions and work with the clay differently. These are our rolling pins, and have those out at the different tables. I would also have a Sharpie for each student, and then the main part of preparing is cutting the clay. And the clay are in these bags, and there's a special PVC pipe that has been marked with 1-inch markings. And you just go in and mark where in the clay each inch. And you'll want a block for each student. And if you're good at eyeballing or keeping level, you can just measure the one. I'm really bad at it, so I take an extra minute and I mark the back side also, the opposite corner, and it just makes it so I'm not guessing. So I have 2 points of reference. Okay. Then you take the wire, wait for the next one, Use the wire like you would use string with sweet rolls, and you pull, and it makes a nice clean cut. And that is the size of clay that each student will be working with. Uniform. If you notice, it is a mess. So you might want to wear older clothes or bring an apron, and it will leave this orangey mark everywhere. The clay is such that you don't want the kids to be washing a ton down the sink. They need to, when it dries, if they can wipe their hands, because the pipes are old, wipe off as much as they can and then wash their hands after they have all the chunks off. Then they can kind of work with the clay. Get it nice and soft. It takes a few minutes. This is bigger than... The tendency is to go really thin with the clay. Need to keep it a little bit thicker. The goal from here on out is to make it so that they don't break. So if they can keep it a ½ inch thick, I think it says maybe a ¼ inch on the instructions, but a little bit thicker works better. And then they use the tools to cut, to form it. There's little cups for bits of water so they can add some texture and work with their fingers. One of the best techniques that I've seen the kids do is to do a pinching technique, but you can get your mouth through pinching. Okay, so the little cups of water, if they want them, they're not thrown out, but they can be used to work with the clay a little bit more, smooth it out. None of the tools actually are thrown out, they're all reused. Maybe I'll form a little mouth. And the kids really get creative. Having a lot of time to work on it is not a horrible thing, although some kids finish fast. Another thing that's in the instructions that not all of them do is if they would like to be able to hang it, this is the time they need to put the hole in. It needs to be at least 1 inch down to keep strong. And they can just use this thicker tool. It's about the size of a pencil to make a hole and smooth it out. Some other fun things are the pony beads. They can add them in as details. Decorations, nose rings. A lot of kids like to make nose rings and earrings out of the wires and embed them in the clay. These need to really be embedded well or they pop right out. We just want them to survive, the masks to survive. You don't want anything that's too protruding because if this is sticking up very high, then when it dries, it'll break off. So everything should be pretty low and solid. The kids will use the tools to do details, maybe some stripes. A lot of them like to use the wire before they use it as a ring as another tool because it has a different texture to it. It can be creative. It's very free form. There's not a lot of right way, wrong ways to do it if they keep a few things in mind. Their holes need to be complete and all the way through, especially for hanging. They don't need holes for eyes unless they want to. They need to keep everything kind of low so it doesn't break when we're moving it around after it dries. So when you're adhering a piece, a nose or an eyebrow or fancy lips or whatever, you're going to score the piece that you're attaching on the back side and the clay surface. You might want to add a little bit of water, and definitely if you're trying to smooth the clay down, you'll use water to smooth it on. But without the scoring, without that Velcro-ness, then the pieces fall off really easily. And remember, you're trying to keep the clay about, I don't know, a 1/2 inch or even a 1/4 inch thick, but then the edges should be about 1 inch wide. It's a little thin, just to add strength to the piece when it dries. They can experiment with the different tools and see how they use the different pieces. It's really a discovery. Oh, I like that project. This is an extra. I have not done it. There is some paint that's right here, and you can bring it out and have a little area where the kids can apply tiny little details with black paint, as you'll see in some of the examples. So at the end, when they're all finished, they need to decide what they're going to name their mask. Maybe it will be happiness or wishfulness, and then they write it. I'll say wistful. This guy looks wistful to me. And name the project. Now remember, these are going to be out at open house, so it needs to be appropriate and it needs to be legible. And not only will all the parents see it, but all the parents' friends will see it. So keep that in mind as you're thinking of your subject and the care that you take in building it. So when you're finished, please make sure that you put everything back on the art cart as close to the way that you found it as you can. If you're running low on supplies, please contact the art docent coordinator and they'll get right on that. The projects should be brought down to the art shed, and then find your teacher's name and try to put as best as you can all of your class in your space. Use the top, middle, lower shelf. Get as creative as you can because it becomes very packed in here. These will sit in here until open house, and then you'll need a day. We'll coordinate with the office. It'll be a day or so before the open house, and your class can come work with the teacher to see how they prefer to do it. And each student comes and carries their mask that's now dried down to the multi-purpose room, and the bleachers have been set out and the class names have been put out, and they each put their mask down. They'll be on display. They go to their different classes, and then a lot of students will go in to see the science projects. They also can come and see their African mask. This is when they should take their mask home. We want the masks to go home with the kids that day. Maybe they won't break if they ride home at night instead of going in their backpacks.